We recruited Linda at Energy BBDO to be our creative department manager. It was there that she realized, and we did too, that she had an incredible passion and capability for finding, championing, and bringing out the best in exceptional talent. She became our head of HR, and the rest is history.
I met Linda in 2003.
In 2007.
In 2009.
In 2012.
In 2013.
In 2015.
In 2016.
In early 2018.
I was looking for my first job in advertising.
And I was just getting my start as a creative recruiter.
I asked Linda for help to revamp my resume.
I lived in New York and was considering a move to Chicago.
She persuaded me to leave San Francisco for Chicago in the middle of February.
She scooped me up and brought me into the family.
She has layers and layers of knowledge.
Her feedback and career advice was genuine.
We met again a second time, oddly enough, back in San Francisco at Apple.
She created the program that allowed me to come and work for Apple.
I was lucky enough to have her join my team. Linda almost single-handedly drove the development and the rollout of a new creative residency program that we established. The program was designed to find diverse and emerging talent.
She was interviewing for a leadership role with the talent acquisition team here at Electronic Arts, and thankfully took the job. Linda stood out from the crowd then and continues to now because of her ability to think really deeply about the business and their needs, and then create and deploy solutions to very complex business needs using her deep understanding of talent acquisition.
I met Linda in 2018 when she joined the Electronic Arts People Experience team here in Redwood City, California. As a critical partner for me, Linda has really pushed the thinking of me and my business partners as we think about sourcing for the most diverse and top-rated talent to fill our critical roles. I am super excited to share her with you today at this conference, so please join me in welcoming Linda Waste.
Hi, I'm Linda Waste, and I'm Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at Electronic Arts. I'm here today to talk to you about how you can disrupt your recruiting process and reduce bias. I've had the opportunity to work at advertising agencies and at tech companies now over the course of 20 years, and I've been able to see what works, what doesn't work, and try things with willing managers and partners. And so today is kind of the culmination of a lot of that and what you're going to see in this presentation. I'm going to try to keep it pretty focused on 3 things that are getting in the way, 3 things you can do differently, and hopefully you'll be able to walk away with something that you could action pretty much tomorrow at your company. So let's get started. So we all want to hire more underrepresented talent. In the last 6 weeks, all of us have been watching as, post the George Floyd murder and all of the protests, how many companies have come out and made public, bold, sweeping statements about their commitments to hiring more diverse talent into their organizations. And these are really wonderful things to see happening, and seeing companies really be public about it is great. I think one of the important things that we have to think about is how. When I see those articles and I see those commitments, I think to myself, what are they going to do differently in their hiring process that's going to achieve those results? Because we've been talking about this for a really long time. We've been talking about it for years. Most of my career as a recruiter, hire for diversity, hire more diverse talent. How are you going to find us more diverse talent? And so much of that focus gets put on the actual finding of the talent. We ignore the entire process that talent has to go through in order to actually get hired. So it's one thing to say you want to do it, and it's one thing to put your numbers out and to put goals out, and it's an entirely different thing to actually figure out how are you going to get there. And I can tell you, it's not just by trying to find those candidates. You have to do fundamentally different things in your process to achieve a different result. So what gets in the way? What is it that's getting in the way of us doing the work that we say we want to do? And I'm going to be a little controversial here and say, maybe it's you. Maybe it's everybody out there. Maybe it's hiring managers, creative directors, recruiters, leaders, CEOs. Maybe it's all of us, actually. As I mentioned, we're not taking the time and we're not putting the focus on the actual process and how we show up differently. In fact, oftentimes we talk about this problem like it's something outside of ourselves. You're a manager and you're saying, well, there just isn't great talent out there that's diverse. There's not enough diverse talent. I don't know where to find them. Recruiting's not sending them to me. All of these problems that are sort of other and outside of ourselves, instead of actually looking in the mirror, which is what I'd suggest all of us do, especially now. Whether you're a recruiter, a hiring manager, a leader, a CEO, an HR professional, it's time to take a good, cold, hard look in the mirror and figure out what each of us should be doing differently. So that's what I'm going to challenge you to do today. Because what we're doing right now, many cases, isn't working because it's this, right? We tell a recruiter to go find some people that we're going to like for a job. We then interview the people out of the pile of resumes or portfolios that we like, and then we hire the person we like the best. And what's wrong with this is it's like all subjective. It's all about how we feel about something. This is a process that's using our gut to make hires. And that's a problem because we're not using data, we're not using a strong process, we're not using discipline, and we're not practicing and preparing for our interviews. So this process ends up being highly subjective. Why do we do it this way? It's because we don't know any better. No one's ever taught us how to do this. Almost none of us get actual training in interviewing and hiring. We're not really taught how to look at a resume. We're not taught how to evaluate a portfolio. We're just told to do it someday. And what we do is we view everything through our own likes and dislikes. We like a particular portfolio because of a brand that's in there that we like. We like a particular portfolio because they, have a design aesthetic that's like the company that we are working at. And we need somebody who can do that particular aesthetic. And so we want to know that they can demonstrate doing that, right? Instead of what we should be doing is actually articulating what's going to make somebody good at the job. And because we don't have any skills and we don't have any training and we don't know how to do that, we just rely on our gut. We do things like Google interview questions, what should I ask somebody in an interview? Because no one tells us what to ask. And if they do, they don't tell us what to listen for. So maybe we're asking the question, but we don't really know what the right answer is. And so we're asking a question and evaluating an answer when we don't even know what the right answer is in the first place. So there's skills that we lack in this process that we really need to develop if we're going to be any good at hiring more diverse talent in our organizations. Second thing that gets in the way is we're human beings. We're human beings with bias. We all have bias. And I know by now, many of us have been through unconscious bias training, and we understand this concept of implicit or unconscious bias. And yet, oftentimes we don't really take a look at our own biases and figure out how they might come into play in the hiring process. And we have positive biases and negative biases. And, we have biases against walking into a busy street because we don't want to die, because that's survival, which is where all of our biases come from in the first place. Our brain is trying to help us survive hundreds of years ago. Nowadays, those biases are actually getting in the way of making great hires because you're using information that is just about your own personal experience. Our brains are wired to find familiarity. They're wired to process thousands of bits of information in a matter of seconds to help you make a decision. And so it's going to rely on making connections with your past. So that's why when you meet somebody that is from where you're from, you have an instantly positive gut feeling about them. If someone tells me, hey, I'm from the south side of Chicago, I'm like, so am I, high five, let's talk about it. Or if someone shares with you that they like the same sport as you, or the same team as you, or even worse, maybe they don't like the same team as you, and now you have a negative bias. All of these things come into play, and I'm using those in a kind of humorous way right now, but there's also all the deeper seated unconscious things about women, and women with children, and women with young children. And all of those things that come into play as well that we have to be really, really careful about. If we don't put a really strong recruiting process in place, our brains can kind of run away with this process and very easily trick us and sabotage us. The third thing we do is this antiquated thinking. You know, recruiting processes and hiring processes haven't changed much in the last 100 years, and it's ripe area for disruption. We think that because we've made a few good hires in our career that we're really good at hiring. I've had managers tell me like, oh, I'm really experienced, I don't need to go through training, I know what I'm doing. And yet maybe they were never actually trained and they just figured it out on their own. You know, we talked earlier about just Googling stuff, right? There's a lot of people that's what they think the right approach is. You know, we write job descriptions, you know, but do we really write them from scratch every time? More often what we do is we pull one that we used 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, and you change a few words and that goes out into the world as your job. Or you might just Google job description for an art director and whatever pops up is what you use and you slap your company's logo on it and off you go. We're not really taking the time to really think about what needs to be done in this job. And I guarantee you that what needed to be done in any job a year ago is entirely different today for more reasons than just our current world situation. So if you're doing that, that's antiquated thinking, and you're expecting a different result. So you're using that old job description, you're using those old requirements, and you're expecting to get some new magical population of candidates that you couldn't previously find because you've said you wanted to hire for diversity. Those job descriptions are also filled with a lot of subjectivity too, and very general language. You look at a lot of job descriptions, you'll see things like, lead and inspire a team of people. I don't know what that means. What does lead and inspire mean? How do you inspire? What does somebody actually do to inspire people? You really have to get down to that level of granular detail and understand the actions that somebody's going to take to achieve that in order to interview for them. Because if you for example, want to interview for people who are collaborative and you simply ask somebody, hey, are you collaborative? You're not going to say, no, I'm not. I'm really not collaborative. I prefer to work on my own. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. You've got to get beyond those kind of superficial, general sort of language and that subjectivity into what are the real insights into work that someone's going to need to do on the job. We also treat this as extracurricular activity, and I'm going to talk more about that. But somehow recruiting has just not been a priority for most of us. It's the work we do after our day jobs are done. And I think this is pretty antiquated thinking. You know, we do it on the side, we do it in the hallways, we do it over the water cooler, we do it, on a Friday night when we have 10 minutes of time to look through the 15 resumes some recruiter sent us. How many times do recruiters have to nag people? Have you looked at those portfolios yet? Have you, checked your email for those resumes yet? No, I'll get to it. I'm sorry, I'm so busy right now. And oftentimes in recruiting, we're like, well, you're so busy because you need people. And if you spend time on recruiting, you'll get people and then you won't be so busy anymore. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's so many things that are just like legacy and tradition that we just get mired in. And we need to break set on all of that. So let's talk about how we solve it. First thing I'll talk about is this. Treat it like your day job, which is kind of what I was just telling you, right? Like, let's prioritize recruiting. Let's give it the meaning and the purpose that it should have by making sure that every day when we look at our calendars, any hiring activity is a priority. Right now, it's probably the first thing that gets taken off your calendar. It's probably the first thing you look at and think, oh my God, I have an interview today. There's no way I can do it because my boss called a meeting, and so I've got to cancel the interview. I can guarantee you that all the recruiting coordinators out here in Silicon Valley wake up almost every morning and get emails about people canceling interviews. It's not a priority. You have to make it a priority. It has to be a part of your day job. If you're a leader in an organization, you have to hold your managers accountable for that. It should be a part of their performance reviews. It should be a part of their bonus allocation and formula. This stuff is important and you have to hold people accountable for doing it. Don't treat it like an extracurricular activity. On top of that, I'd recommend you treat it like a project. This is also something we don't do. We have this weird sort of like relay race baton handoff we do right now where we sort of hand a job description to a recruiter and expect them to go do something. And then the recruiter hands a baton to somebody else and like review those resumes. And then a series of people walk into an interview room one-on-one. And we expect that somehow is going to achieve great results. We all do projects every day. We meet, we talk to each other. We brief our teams and we hold people accountable for achieving results. And yet in the interview process, we didn't do any of that. All of these things that we know to be the right ways to achieve great results in our work, we need to apply that thinking to our recruiting. So treat it like a day job, treat it like a project. And you gotta get training. You have to train people. None of us know instinctively how to interview someone. It's really hard to do. It's very, very difficult to not only prepare and ask deep, insightful questions about actual work that this person is going to need to do, and then to listen for the clues that are going to tell you whether or not this person is going to succeed in this role. You can't do this without training. I do hiring training a lot. I do a lot of EA. I participated in some hiring training at Apple as well. And one of the things I often ask people is how many people, show of hands, have actually ever had any interview or hiring training. I've been in rooms and rooms and rooms for people, hundreds and hundreds of people. It's maybe 10%, and probably most of them are here in Silicon Valley. So I would probably take a guess that most of you that are in advertising agencies have never been offered hiring training, and their agencies have never actually offered it. When it's such a critical, important task that we all do, and it's something that's just not instinct. We want to get out of instinct because we want to get out of our bias. We have to train people on how to do this. There are all sorts of outside consultants that you could hire to come and do this for you. You could ask your recruiters in your organization, probably have some pretty good ideas as well to put some training together for you. This is a critically important piece. And by the way, I know that costs are tight and a lot of people are struggling with finances. I mean, having worked in agencies myself, running HR, I know what my training budget was. It was this big. That's a mistake. It's a huge mistake. For the amount of money that you would pay a headhunter to place one creative director at your agency, you can hire a company to come in and train all of your interviewers on how to interview. It will be the best money you've spent, I guarantee it, and it will make a difference. I talked earlier about running your recruiting like you're running a project. Write a brief. We write creative briefs all the time, and they serve a purpose. They help everybody understand what we're doing and where we're going and what we want to achieve. A great brief is not restrictive. When you do a creative brief for an advertising project, the last thing we want to see is what font somebody should use, what color they should be using, what location they should be shooting at. All of those executional directives, these are things we don't want in creative briefs, right? Because they restrict our expansive thinking and they restrict our creativity. It's the same thing here. A great brief gives good direction, but it doesn't dictate the solution. It's not a laundry list of requirements and boxes that need to be checked. It's actually a purpose-driven document. And as a manager, if you do write a brief, it'll force you to think about what the actual work is that someone's going to need to do. And it's going to help you identify how they'd be successful, which is going to help you prepare for the interview. So you've got to write a brief. And I'm going to give you a few examples of this. And by the way, this is the one thing that I would say if you do nothing else coming out of this presentation, it's this. If you write a brief and brief people and get everybody on the same page, I guarantee you it's going to make a huge difference for you. After you've written a brief, you brief your team. So this is when you do your kickoff meeting. You get everybody together in a room. And again, you're the manager, you're in control of this process. You get everyone together in a room and take them through your brief. Tell them what you're looking for, let them ask questions. You can all talk about who's going to ask what, give out your interviewer assignments, and then everyone knows what to prepare for the interview. And do the work. Most people think the interview itself is the work, but I'm here to tell you the work should be done way before you walk into that room. No one would ever show up to a launch day or a show or an event without having practiced and rehearsed and done a bunch of work up front. There's no way any of us in this field would ever do that, and yet we do it every day when we interview. We don't prepare, we don't write questions, and we walk into a room and expect to get a great result without any preparation. It's just not going to happen. You've got to do the work. It's not hard, but it takes time, and it's really important. And then finally, checking your bias, right? When your bias comes into play, you know it because your gut tells you something. Again, right? That spidey sense. That's your bias talking right there in your gut. So when you look at a resume and you like it, ask yourself why. Challenge yourself. Don't let yourself off the hook. More importantly, if you look at a resume and you're ready to pass on it, why? What is it about this resume that makes you want to pass on it? Does it have something to do with their education? Is it because they went to a school that you've never heard of? Is it because they went to community college? Here's an interesting one. I have a son who's going into university this fall, and a couple years ago I was talking to a friend of mine and I was telling her that he was considering community college. And you know what she said to me? Oh, I would never let my son go to community college because community college kids are lazy. Think about that as a bias. Community college kids are lazy? This is an example of education bias at play overtly. So think about what you're looking at and why you're putting somebody in the in pile or the out pile. Same goes for portfolios. You have to actually academically think about what makes a piece of creative work good and what it took to make it good. And then you have to ask questions of these candidates about what they did and how they thought about it. So in both cases, these are places where you can check your gut, and that's your bias talking. How do we know this works? Results. Results, results, results. So as I mentioned, I worked on my first recruiting brief at BBDO, which is a long time ago. We use this at DDB as well. I think it was about a 12-month period. And during that 12-month time, we tracked our hires and we found that we increased our hiring of underrepresented talent by 43% in a year. At Apple, we use this process. We did training and preparation and feedback, and we used that for the apprenticeship program that was built there called The Orchard. And I remember one of the creative directors who was a part of our interview team, it was during a big kind of like visit where 25 candidates were all interviewing at the same time on the same day. We had interview rooms going all down the hallway. And I was monitoring everything to make sure it was going smoothly. And one of the creative directors, who probably, again, had been interviewing for I think like 15 years, he walked by on his way to one of the interview rooms and he said to me, "Thank you so much for that training. I finally think I know what I'm doing." Like 15 years this person had been interviewing and he finally got training and he finally felt like he knew what he was doing. And I mean, to me, that speaks volumes about the value. On top of that, that program has been really, really successful, and I think like 90% of the apprentice talent that was hired is actually now full-time at Apple. Let's see, electronic arts. We put the alignment guide in place. I mentioned Chris Bruzzo went through the hiring training, and we put the alignment guide in place, or the brief, if you will, and year-over-year results were anywhere between 12 and 20% higher on hiring of underrepresented talent between FY19 and FY20 for us. So we have direct experience that just that brief alone is making a difference. What I'll say on top of that is accountability makes a huge difference. In our situation, Chris really got involved at a leadership level. He didn't delegate diversity. He didn't put it on someone else's plate. He owned it himself, and he made sure all his managers owned it as well. We have a great partnership and we work really closely together on how we can both improve along the way. And that's made a huge difference for us. So these things get results, I guarantee it. I want to say a few words about hiring over video because we're doing that a lot right now. And I know it's top of mind for everybody. I actually had a situation recently where a manager had said to the recruiter, "Hey, I think this person's great. We've done all our video interviews, but I'm going to hold off making a decision until we can interview them in person." Now, all of you know we're probably not doing that anytime soon, pretty much anywhere. So if you're going to hire, you're going to have to hire remotely. And I thought it was really interesting that there was this desire to meet somebody in person before making a final decision. And it made me think, like, what would be the reason? Why would you need to meet somebody in person if you've asked really good questions and you've gotten great answers from this candidate and you think that they're qualified for the job? What else is it that you're finding out when you meet them in person? It's all our biases. Our brains trying to check familiarity, our brains trying to check our gut, our brains trying to check somebody's handshake or their eye contact, all things that have little to nothing to do with whether or not someone's going to be successful in the job. So there's literally no reason that you would have to meet somebody in person to know if they're right for your job if you're doing all this other stuff and you're writing a brief, briefing your team, prepping and preparing for your interviews, and asking really good, insightful questions. So let's recap. What do we got here? Treat it like your day job. Prioritize recruiting. Incredibly important. Don't let it be an extracurricular activity. There is no more important work that you can do as a manager than spend time on hiring and recruiting. It makes a world of difference. We all know what it's like to have a hire that didn't work out and how painful that can be. So do the work. Train your people. Get training into your companies as soon as possible so that everyone has the skills and the resources and the tools they need to do an excellent job interviewing people. Write a brief, treat it like a project, brief your team, stay aligned with everybody along the way, including your recruiter. And again, do the work. Prep for your interview. Read that resume before you're popping open your Zoom screen so you really know what their past experience looks like and you really have some really good questions laid out for yourselves. There's some resources that we're going to provide for you. There's a downloadable version of the recruiting brief that you can find on our company profile. And you can join me for a Q&A on inclusive recruiting on Tuesday, July 28th at 1 p.m. PST. And finally, you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to hit me up there. Thanks very much.